So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Richard Hidry for this afternoon or this evening's lecture, depending where you are, or this morning if you're on the West Coast. Dr. Hidry will be speaking about Rabbi Ben Zion Uziel, and we'll learn more about him as the afternoon progresses. Dr. Hidry teaches Talmud at the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Yeshiva University and is a rabbi in the Sephardi Synagogue in Brooklyn. His research and writing has focused on controversy and dialectic in the Talmud. His first book, which was his dissertation, focused on legal pluralism. And Dr. Hidry argued that the Bavli is tolerant of multiple practices, while the Yerushalmi pushes for uniformity. His second book reads the Talmud on the background of Greco-Roman rhetorical education. One of Dr. Hidry's goals is to bring together the world of academic and traditional study of Talmud. And as part of that effort, he's currently working on a Talmud commentary on selected sugyot that highlight the best of academic methodology and present that in a way that's accessible to non-specialists. Dr. Hidry also runs the websites Rabbinic.org, which lists important online resources for the study of Talmud and manuscripts, as well as teachtorah.org, which offers curricula for high school Judaic studies teachers, curriculum. I'm not sure, for teaching and learning high school Judaic studies. Welcome, Dr. Hidry.
Thank you so much. It's really my pleasure to be here and an honor to be introduced by Dr. Steinmetz. Devora, I don't know if you remember, but about 10 years ago, I sat next to you at an AJS conference lunch. And on the table, we're talking about the different research ideas and projects. And we came upon one that couldn't be done just by a simple word search. It was like a methodology or problem that you have to, somehow search the whole entire Talmud. And everybody on the table was like, oh, this would be impossible to do. And then you said, well, there's always daf yomi. And that comment stuck in my head and really represents your rigor and your excellence in research. And it stuck in my head so much that during lockdown a few months ago, I actually started teaching daf yomi. So thank you for planting that idea. It's really a special honor to be here, and I want to thank everybody at Drisha who helped to organize this, including Shlomo Zukier and others. And to speak about Rabbi Uziel, who is one of my personal rabbinic heroes in his view of Halakhah and his goals for the state of Israel and for Am Yisrael. So first, a little bit about Rabbi Uziel himself. I'm going to share my screen with the sources, but you probably have access to the sources on your own if you want to be able to pull them up on your own computer and scroll through them. So we start with a picture of him, and whenever I see a picture of Rabbi Uziel, I'm struck by his kindly demeanor and smile, but also his very intense eyes. And I think both those together really represent his demeanor and his love for Israel and sense of peace and loving kindness, but his intense gaze as his wisdom and his scholarly insight, and both those are the elements that he brings together that we're going to talk about, and we see throughout his Piskei Halakhah. Rabbi Ben Zion Meir Chai Uziel was born in 1880 and died in 1953. He was born to families of great sages on both sides of his family. And I think he felt the weight of that responsibility. His father told him so. And there's a kind of sad but heartwarming story about his father. Before Rabbi Uziel turned 13, before his bar mitzvah, his father came to him and said, I have a medical condition and not likely that I'm going to survive more than 1 year. But I always wanted to see you married under the chuppah. So therefore, on the day that you become bar mitzvah, you're also going to get married. And that's exactly what happened. He had a marriage ceremony with another daughter of a rabbi. They went through with the ceremony, and then each went home, and they lived in their parents' homes until they were 18, and then they actually got together and had 5 children. So that's a kind of unusual upbringing. Also, when his father died, Rabbi Uziel was responsible for bringing in some of the income to help support the family. And so he had to split his time between study and working. So he had a difficult upbringing, but perhaps it's those very difficulties that gave him the strength and courage to do great things in his life. So when he was just a young age of 31 in 1911, he became the chief rabbi of Yafo. Then in 1921, he was called upon to be the chief rabbi of Salonika in Turkey. And he returned 3 years later to become the Chacham Bashi in Tel Aviv, alongside Rav Kook there. He had a good relationship, a good close working relationship with Rav Kook, and that was very important in people seeing that and bringing together the Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities. And then eventually he became in 1939 the chief rabbi of the British Mandate, and in 1948 of the State of Israel for those few years until his death in 1953. So this is really a long career in service of Israel, and we can document it through many of his books. I only quoted three of his many works here. Mishpatei Uziel is his main collection of shutim of responsa, but also Hegyonei Uziel on Jewish philosophy, and Drashot Uziel are his drashot on Pirkei Avot, and many other works. There's actually a website devoted to Rabbi Uziel in which you can download and read most of his works online for free. So my presentation I'm about to give you is very much based on prior scholars who have researched Rabbi Uziel, including Rabbi Mark Angel, who wrote an entire book about Rabbi Uziel, Zvi Zohar, Aryeh Edrei, and many others. So I'm definitely indebted to all of their insights. So if there's one word we can think of that encompasses so much of Rabbi Uziel's outlook in this Pesak Halakhah, I would have to say it's unity. Unity for the people of Israel, especially coming into a new state in the land of Israel. So the first teshuvah is going to relate to the following verse in Dvarim. So let's explain the verse first, and then we'll see what the question was about. The pasuk says, "Banim atem l'Adonai Elohechem, lo titkodedu v'lo tasimu korcha ben enechem lamet." You are children of Hashem your God. Do not gash yourselves or shave the front of your heads because of the dead. So the simple meaning of this pasuk is talking about an ancient mourning custom. When a loved one dies, people used to gash their skin to show their great mourning also. However, the Midrash adds a secondary meaning to it, which is found here in the Sifrei, source number 2. Lo titkodedu, lo ta'asu agudot, ela hayu kolchem aguda achat. Do not make factions among the Jewish people. Don't make all different groups doing different things, but rather you should be unified as one faction, right? Just as God has his chamber in heaven, so too his vault should be on earth. So just as God is unified in heaven, so too we should be unified on earth. Rabbi Uziel in the Teshuvah, and that's a first interesting thing about Teshuvot is he doesn't only get straight to the Halakhah, but he often spends time thinking about what the verse means. Why did the rabbis interpret it in this way? So a lot of it is some theoretical explanations so that we understand the sources. And here he explains that while our bodies are holy, and therefore we cannot gash ourselves even in mourning, so too, as the Jewish people, we are all one body politic. And therefore, we cannot allow ourselves to break up into different groups and have different practices and customs. So with that in mind, one more source that's going to come up often is this pasuk in Mishle, Shema b'ni musar avicha v'al titosh torat imecha, that we should always follow the wisdom, the guidance of our fathers and mothers. So that'll be kind of counter to when can we change and when should we keep our traditions the same as they were before. All right, so with that in mind, we can read the question. So this was addressed to Rabbi Uziel in 1938 when he was in Tel Aviv, the chief rabbi, by a fellow rabbi also in Tel Aviv. And the rabbi asking the question says as follows: the question has been posed to us. Rabbi Uziel's writing, quoting the question: in our day, with God's help, the Jewish settlement in our holy land has grown and may continue to grow. Our brothers from all parts of the dispersion have been gathered here, each with his own particular customs and prayer and other areas that he received from his fathers. and has been accustomed to practice for his entire life. Everyone loves the customs of their ancestors, and nobody wants to abandon them. And they noticed that on Sukkot, there are many customs regarding the shaking of the lulav. And here he goes on and explains and shows that there are so many different customs. In his synagogue, you have some people that are shaking the lulav when they shake, they start to the south and they turn around with it, and others that start shaking to the east and they stay in one place and just move the lulav around. And some people shake it only twice when they say the pasuk of Hodu. Some people say it 3 times every time they say Hodu, and they shake it in different ways. And so I guess you're just looking around on Sukkot, and instead of being a nice formal ceremony where everybody's doing the same thing and that would look nice, you have a havoc with everyone doing totally different customs and practices. So the rabbi asking the question says, this looks kind of crazy. What should we do about this? Everyone prays together in one synagogue, but everyone practices his own custom. This has, on the one hand, a good result in that peace reigns. Similarly, they are dividing their practices regarding prayer, additional liturgical piyutim, the recitation of tachanun. As much as possible, each person retains his own custom. These things occur daily without causing outbursts. Rather, they lead to peace and serenity. So the rabbi asking the question says, it is peaceful. Everybody recognizes and is tolerant of each other because they know you come from Morocco, you come from Iraq, you come from somewhere else, and that's why you are practicing these things. You have a Kabbalistic custom, you have a Maimonidean custom, and so we recognize that they're all okay. So that way, peace is maintained. And so it's not only Sukkot, but also Tachanun. Different communities have taken upon different paragraphs in which they say the piyutim, especially around the holidays, are added into the standard liturgy. Some have more piyutim, less. They say it in different places. But everyone wants to keep what they did in the old country. So you have this mishmash of many different practices, and they're all in the same synagogue. So should we go ahead and be tolerant of this? Or nevertheless, I feel perhaps we should be concerned about the principle of lo titgodedu, that verse that we should not break up into factions. That was the question that was presented to Rabbi Uziel. And you can see how this would be a relatively new question because when each community was in their own countries, in their own cities, in Poland and Russia and Syria and Egypt, so everybody's doing their own ancestral practices and they don't see or know about each other. It's only once you have this ingathering of exiles from all these different countries in such a short time that people are praying together, and now this disharmony comes up. Okay, so most of the source sheet is in English, but this one section I'd like to read in Hebrew with your permission. We can get some of the flavor of Rabbi Uziel's Hebrew, but I'll translate. And this is very typical of Rabbi Uziel, starting off not with a halachic source, but with this kind of grand historical and philosophical view. So Rabbi Uziel starts, Ben kol ha'ma'alot ha'mesayanot u'mavdilot et Yisrael mikol ha'amim, tofeset makom berosh. This is among all the great qualities that separate and in which Israel excels above all other nations. The number one quality is hitachduta hanifla'a sheloma zot betorata, is our uniformity or unity around the Torah. This is already an interesting line. I imagine if I threw this out as a poll here, right? It says, what's the number one quality of the Jewish people? You might say a lot of things. You might say we contributed monotheism to the world, our sense of righteousness and tikkun olam, maybe our food or a scientific discovery. But I don't know, we're kind of known to be a somewhat contentious people. So I'm not sure if I would have picked this one, but Rabbi Uziel knows what he's talking about. So let's see how he backs this up. This is the essence of our existence and perseverance. אלפי שנים עברו מיום מעמד הר סיני, הרבה גלויות גלתה יהדות והתדך מגוי אל גוי ממלכה לממלכה. It's been thousands of years since we received the Torah on Har Sinai, and we've gone into many exiles from one country to another. הרבה שמדות נגזרו עליה ועל תורתה לשמידה ולזייפה. Many pogroms against persecutions against us and the Torah to destroy it or to forge, call it a forgery. Here we might be talking about Islam that claims that the Jews have forged our version of the Torah. Or l'sares otiotel shabesh kavanoteha, to change the words or to destroy the meaning. Maybe here he's referring to Christianity, who reinterprets and misinterprets many parts of the Torah. And throughout all the countries we're in, we pick up and are influenced by foreign languages and ways. Nevertheless, right, even though under the most difficult circumstances, Judaism has come out clean, purified, like metal is smelted in a crucible, and you get just the pure silver from it. So too, all those difficulties have made us only stronger and full in our spirit. ואחידה ומאוחדת ביסודה תורתה. וכל אלה שנסו לפגוע באחדות תורה זאת, and all those who tried to damage this unit, the unity of the Torah, and then he lists the different factions and sectarians throughout history, השומרונים, הסדוקים, האיסיים, הקראים, וכיתות של תלמידי משיחי השקר, עבדו לגמרי או שמתקיימים כיום. The Samaritans, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Karaites, and all those false messianic movements are completely gone, and maybe they're just a small remnant of them around, but they have no force. So first of all, the mention of the Essenes, I think, is quite interesting. He's writing this in 1938. This is way before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. So why was anybody talking about the Essenes? Maybe he knew something about the Damascus document, which was found in the Cairo Geniza, or probably he's reading the Jewish historians that know the Essenes from Josephus. So that, I think, shows an interest of his in knowing about the history of the Jewish people during the second Bet HaMikdash, and that informs his knowledge of Judaism today. And I think in this, he's absolutely correct. All Jews today, I mean, you can ask, what about, there's other denominations, there's lots of Chilonim and Charedim and Hasidim and all that. And he says, yes, but really even despite all the denominations that we have today, basically they're all versions of Rabbinic Talmudic Judaism. I think if you'd ask him about Chilonim, so these are people that don't follow the Talmud, but the Talmud, the Halakhah that they don't follow is the Halakhah of the rabbis, right? And even people who are more secularized, whatever they do during the year, if it's Haggadah Shel Pesach or anything else, it is still one Judaism with different levels of observance and different flavors. So I think he's really very astute in this historical analysis, that all of these sectarians that really had fundamentally different views and halachic stances have not survived. And so in that sense, despite all our differences, we are basically one Torah. Okay, so why is he saying all this? אחדות זאת נובעת ממקור נאמן של תורת אל חי שהוא יחידו של עולם ואחד מיוחד בשמיים ובארץ וכל סיבותיהם. So elaborating on the Midrash, says that this Torah comes from the one God, and it's appropriate that there be one Torah that derives from one God. And he goes on to say that really this uniformity of Israel testifies to the unity of God, who is our shield and our Savior. והיא אגודת אלוקים בארץ שמלמדת את האדם גם בתורתה וגם באחדותה, צמא לאחדות שלמה שאין לך דבר שיכול להפרידה ולפוררה. So that's really our strength. It comes from our unity, and without that we'll fall apart. But with that we testify to God's unity, and so therefore there is really no higher value to which we should aspire in Halakhah than to have unity and uniformity. Okay, that's all the beginning. He didn't quote any halachic sources yet, but now you already see where he's going. And I think this is a key to understanding his halachic outlook. First, you have to look at the historical overview, the philosophical, theological big picture, And only then, when you know where you need to get to and what's needed by the Jewish people, then we can delve into the technicalities of the halakhah to see how we can achieve that goal. All right, so I'm skipping a little. So he looks in, he quotes all of the Talmud. He goes into Rishonim and notes that Rashi and Rambam have different reasons for lo titkodedu. According to Rashi, he explains that the Torah should not become two Torahs. If you look around and some people are standing and some people sitting and doing different things, then people will say, I guess there's two different Torahs because you're not practicing the same thing. And so that will be demeaning to the Torah. According to Maimonides, however, the prohibition is to prevent controversy. This is more of a social reason. People will want to denigrate the other in order to push their practice more. And so that's more of a social reason. And so he shows what would be the differences between them. It might make a difference in if it's only a custom, not a official halacha. Then, according to Rashi, it won't look like two Torahs because it's merely a minhag. But according to Rambam, even a custom it would be a problem because that will still cause fights and controversies. Okay, after all that discussion, he says, therefore, it is forbidden to practice different customs in one synagogue with regard to prayer and anything related to it. Rather, the entire congregation is required to follow one custom based on the majority. We have already proven that this prohibition applies with regard to the practice in one city. How much more so in one synagogue? For beside the prohibition of making the Torah appear as two, it can also cause controversy during time of prayer, which is prohibited according to all opinions. Rather, all Jews are commanded and obligated to be a unified collective with one heart turned towards their Father in heaven. So there you go. So his answer is, you're going to look around and see people shaking lulav in different ways. Take a vote, see what the majority is, and then the others, the minority, has to abandon their ancient custom, even though that's the way their grandparents did it and their parents did it. And I think he understands that that's difficult for a lot of people because they feel like they're not being authentic. They're not doing it in the true way. But nevertheless, this is a halakhah. He actually proves during the teshuvah that the law of lo titkodedu is mideoraita, right? It's a biblical law. And so therefore that would certainly override any other customs or rabbinic laws that would get in the way of changing it. From what has been said, we learned that it is forbidden to create subgroups, except in the case of Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities, which are different in their customs and are distinctive as particular units. This is also a point of controversy, right? So he's recognizing that people that come from different countries, and so these are like totally different units coming from Ashkenaz or Sfarad. But even here, he would push towards uniformity. According to the Mordechai, it is permissible for each community to challenge its custom if they are to change its custom if they are inclined to do so. Since it is permissible, it becomes inherently obligatory to unify. It is important to aspire to this and to pray that the one God will unify all of us in worship to worship him with one heart and one practice and speech, and it's certainly forbidden because of the prohibition of lo titkodedu to add one rip upon another and divide into many groups. For Israel will not be redeemed until they become one unified group. So he's proving from the Mordechai that if someone wants to change from their custom to another one, as long as they do so consistently, they are permitted to do so. And so therefore, yes, even though we can argue that to have Ashkenazim and Sfaradim as two different Batei Knesiyot and each following their own way, nevertheless, since it's permissible to change from one to the other, and therefore the law of lo titkodedu will override the differences and teach that would be a mitzvah for everyone to change and agree on one practice only. I have written this to teach that it's forbidden, even in two separate synagogues, to adopt different customs in all manners relating to Torah and the commandments. How much more so it is forbidden to do so in one synagogue, which is considered by all to be similar to one court in one city, in which half rule in one way and half in another, a phenomenon that is forbidden because of the law of lo titkodedu. It is almost as if to do so would constitute a commandment that is performed by the commission of a sin, mitzvah haba'a ba'avera. Okay, so that's the end of this this teshuvah, and he ends with very strong language that in this case in particular, when talking about within one synagogue, if someone would say, "I want to shake my lulav starting to the south," when everybody else is doing it to the east, and he thinks he's doing a good thing because he's following the way of the Ari, or the way of the community from where he comes from. And he says, I'm doing it the right way. No, it turns out that his mitzvah actually is a negative because it was performed by the commission of a sin, the sin of lo titkodedu. If that person is the minority, they're actually sinning in a sin mideoraita in practicing against what everyone else has done. So these are really very strong words. And, I guess something to think about is, has his vision, what happened to his vision? If you look, or if you go now to a Bet Knesset here or in Israel, wherever you are, right, what is the actual practice? So I would like to hear more from you about that in a few minutes. But now that we know what he says about one synagogue in particular, we can expand the view and ask, what about the Israel as a whole? And here, this relates to the pronunciation of Hebrew. And here I'm gonna quote another teshubah by Rav Kook as a contrast to what Rabbi Uziel says. So we can think about these two different points of view. When we think about pronunciation, right, we want to make sure to pronounce, especially when we're praying and saying Shema, pronounce things correctly. But now that we are coming from different countries where we had different pronunciations into the state of Israel, does that change anything, or should we continue pronouncing Hebrew the way we were before? So all of this is going to depend on, we're going to need this source from the Rambam in Mishneh Torah, where Rambam says, when someone's reading Shema, one has to be very careful in pronouncing the letters correctly. If you did not do so, you nevertheless fulfilled your obligation to say Shema. So bedi avad, it's okay if you mispronounce something, as long as you don't skip a whole word or change the meaning of the word. It's okay. But lechatechila, one should try to be as careful as possible in pronunciation. What does he mean by this? Ketzad yedaktek. You should make sure, and if there's a dagesh in the letter, not to read it as rafeh. And if there's no dagesh, don't read it as if there is a dagesh. If it's a shavana, don't pronounce it as a shava nach, and the other way around, right? So we want to be very careful in all of our pronunciations and the vowels and the letters. Okay, that's what Rambam writes. Now, based on that, Rav Kook writes as follows. In the Holy City in Jerusalem, he's writing this in 1932. He says, in my humble opinion, it appears that the Maimonides holds that even though we established that ex post facto, b'di'avad, he has fulfilled his obligation, even if he was not precise in the reading of the letter, it is fully required lechatechila to be completely precise in reading so that the expression will be full and perfect in accordance with the grammatical principles, and so on. Based on this, we can discuss situations in which a group's accent is different in the pronunciation of the letters. For example, they pronounce them in a manner that is different from others. For example, the Yemenite accent pronounces certain letters with a unique accent. From all that has been written, it is clear that there is no possibility to change from one accent to another, because such a change for those who have a tradition of another accent is considered a general reading, meaning less precise, but not midakdek for reading for those letters, right? In other words, if someone is a Yemenite and they make a distinction between a gimel and jimel, and so now if they would change and pronounce all gimels as g, so now they are reading less precisely than they are used to. And that would be a violation of Rambam's principle that you should make as many distinctions as possible so that to be more precise. In particular, a change from the Yemenite accent, which has been a tradition from the earliest generation and which is known to be the most precise among the accents, is certainly forbidden. And even though the practice in Israel is to give preference to the Sephardi pronunciation, this is because it has a particular pleasantness and beauty. Nevertheless, the essential advantage of a particular accent is its preciseness in distinguishing between letters and vowels. In this regard, the Sephardi pronunciation is not even on the level of Ashkenazi accent, and certainly the Yemenite pronunciation is more commendable than all others, since it distinguishes greatly between every letter and sound. So, right, he's recognizing that in the modern state of Israel, after all the discussions about what will be the national language, it's the Sephardic pronunciation that is won out. It's not exactly the Sephardic pronunciation from Middle Eastern countries. It's a little bit more of a watered down version. Most modern Israeli Hebrew does not distinguish between gutturals, aleph and ayin, he and het, but they do put the accents on the right place most of the time. So people, that's what people have adopted in the street, and so it has a certain pleasantness and beauty, and everybody can gather around that pronunciation. But that Sephardic pronunciation does not distinguish between all the differences that an Ashkenazi accent would. For example, Ashkenazim distinguish between kamatz and patach, between sereh and segol, whereas the Sephardim do not. So therefore, he has a kind of hierarchy. The Yemenite is the most precise accent, so Yemenite can't change to anything else. Then Ashkenazim are second best; they can't change. And then the Sephardi accent, which is the most common, but it lacks many of the distinctions. Okay, I mean, what he's saying is true. I would add that the Sephardi accent actually does distinguish between some things that Ashkenazim don't. So each accent has their own distinctions and own benefits. And for that reason, he says, no one is allowed to change from one to the other, because that would be going down a level. And I guess he's not imagining that everybody's all of a sudden going to change to speaking Yemenite. That would be quite difficult to do. So he says, since the tradition of an accent is no less important than any other religious training, every community is thus required to fulfill the guideline of do not forsake the teachings of your mother, right? That's that verse I quoted from earlier from Mishleh. Just as it applies to matters of ritual and family life, whether it means lenient or strict, heaven forbid that a person breaks away on this matter, for ancestral traditions are the fulfillment of a holy Torah. Ask your father and he will tell you. Heaven forbid that those fulfilling a holy duty should change from pronunciation that is precise and accepted from olden days to another one. And you should not learn from the fact that others have done so, because that was not the will of our sages. Okay, so Rav Kook, a great mind, great leader, is saying that everyone should keep the same pronunciation that they learned from their parents. And here's a picture of just some letters in the archive of that people have written to Rabbi Uziel from lots of different places. All right, Rabbi Uziel now responds to Rav Kook's learned argument, and he begins again with a historical overview, right? I can imagine, someone asking a question. Every time someone asks a question, he says, well, let me go back to the year 70, and, right? So he says, the return of the exiles to the land of Israel, which has reawakened in our time, through the grace of God, the rebirth of the Hebrew language as the spoken language of the Jewish people who live in Israel, in addition to being the language of the Torah, having previously been divided into many and varied exilic dialects and different pronunciations, has raised a very important halachic question regarding the creation of a uniform language also in pronunciation, right? So already from there, you can see where he's going with this, right? One of the greatest miracles of the rise of the state of Israel, in addition to the military miracles and political and scientific and all that, is the fact that we revived the Hebrew language from a language of only study and prayer to a real live language. So that's something that within Halakhah, we have to recognize is a new phenomenon. So this question was resolved without difficulty when it was posed in the marketplace and educational institutions with the adoption of the Sephardi pronunciation with some slight modification as the language of communication and learning, right? This has already been settled out in the streets, and the modern Israeli Hebrew follows more or less Sephardi pronunciation. However, when the question is raised regarding to commandments and obligations, as like reading the Torah and Shema and prayer, and anything else that has to be said according to law in Hebrew, we cannot simply agree on our own to do right? Whatever sounds nice, we have to look into the halachic sources. Okay, so he's recognizing this two ways, these two tracks, right? You have to look at the bigger picture of what's going on in his history and in the real world outside, but we can't just then do whatever the trend is, but it has to be based on halachic sources, which was what he does now.
Dr. Hidary, we have can I interrupt with a question?
Of course.
Okay, Gela is asking what one does if the change was already made by your ancestors. She's saying that her father taught her the pronunciation that is not the same as his father.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's a fantastic question. And I mean, most of the time, people continue whatever pronunciation they grew up with, because when they're a child, it's kind of difficult to change one's pronunciation midway. So most likely in that case, you would follow whatever your father did. Although sometimes people find out, oh, you know what, they actually had an old tradition a different way, and like that better. This is what's really going to complicate this question nowadays, because in Israel, if you just go to any random person in the street, you'll find that they're half this, half Yemenite, and half Polish, and half Russian, and half Israeli for 10 generations, right? So there's so much intermarriage, and people are studying in schools together and going to the army together. My guess is in a couple of generations, the entire Ashkenazi Sephardi split is going to be much less important. I'll just for myself, an anecdote about that is a few years ago, I became one of the rabbis and chazanim in the Spanish Portuguese synagogue. And they have very different pronunciations and tunes and customs. And so in order to be chazan there, I had to learn not to say ayin, but rather to say ngayin, which is the farthest back down the throat that the Western Sfaradim could get to say that guttural. You ends up sounding funny for a while, because especially if you have to say things like Moshe haya ganav meod, right? Mikol Adam. It could be a problem. It sounds like you're saying Moshe was the greatest thief rather than the most humble. But with a little training, I did learn that pronunciation, and I was proud to, because my grandmother traces her line from Spain, and so definitely I do have some lineage from Spanish Portuguese. So that's exactly a question. So I didn't feel like I was being inauthentic, even though it's not the way my father and grandparents spoke. It is something that was within my tradition. There is something beautiful about having all these ancient traditions and alive, and you can go to different synagogues and hear those distinctions. And so it's not all sandwiched and to become the same lowest common denominator. So that's definitely a fantastic question, and I'd love to get back to that and hear more of your thoughts about where we have gone since Rabbi Uziel wrote this, and where do you think we should go? But let's go back and to his view and how he proves what he's going to say. So he's quoting the Mishnah, which actually is the basis of the Rambam that we read before, that says if someone reads and is not precise in the letters, he still has fulfilled his obligation, b'diavad. We can infer from this that if he does not swallow an entire letter or change the accent to a degree, at least to a mistake in its meaning, does not fall into the category of imprecise reading of the letters, and we do not even require him to change his pronunciation a priori lechatechila. For if so, what about the Ephraimites who could not pronounce the letter shin? What would they do? Or people from Haifa and Baishan in the times of the Talmud, they did not distinguish between Aleph and Ayin in those cities. And yet they were able and permitted lechatechila to go ahead and pronounce and say Shema according to their pronunciation. And if it is true with regard to changing letters, even more so regarding vowels. Therefore, from what has been said, we can conclude that the law is clear that changes in pronunciation do not cause a reader to have not fulfilled his obligation, even if we assume that he erred in his accent, since everything is determined by one's inner intent and the light of the matter. Thus, anyone who reads and is careful to read properly in the accent to which he is accustomed, or which he chooses, has fulfilled the obligation. And anyone who's precise with regard to one accent or another, because he believes that it is the correct and desirable pronunciation, should not only not be punished, but is suitable to receive a reward from God, who does not withhold goodness from those who go in innocence. Right? So this is a very, very different way of viewing the matter. Rabbi Uziel is kind of thinking that, Rabbi Rav Kook is thinking that there's one ideal way to pronounce, when the most distinctions is the best. The Yemenites seem to have that. And if you're going to deviate at all, you're probably going to deviate to something worse. Therefore, no one can change. So because he thinks that there's one absolute ideal, you're going to end up having to tolerate pluralism of practice. Whereas, paradoxically, Rabbi Uziel is the opposite, because he thinks it doesn't really matter how you pronounce it, as long as you're consistent in the way that you pronounce it, so that you understand what you're saying, and those around you, if they also speak the same way, will understand what you're saying. Then that's perfectly fine. And no one forced the people in Haifa to not pray or not be chazan because they couldn't say the letter ayin. They were chazan in their place. And that's perfectly fine. So further, since any pronunciation is fine, therefore, someone who wants to change their pronunciation because they did some research and they find out, you know what, I think the Iraqis have the best pronunciation, and they want to change and do that, not only is it permitted, that would be a good thing to do. That would be a mitzvah. So more about the people from Haifa. In the Talmud Yerushalmi, however, this Mishnah is read as follows: we do not allow the people of Haifa, Baishan, and Tivon to lead services because they pronounce the he and the het and the letter ayin as aleph. And if their language is arranged, it is permissible. In my humble opinion, it seems that the explanation of the Jerusalem Talmud is that if the language is arranged vis-a-vis those who hear him, that they also speak like him, then lechatechila, that person can be a chazan because they all speak like him. And then that would be a precise reading for them. So that's totally allowed, and you don't need to ask them to change. And this leader is precise in the language and pronunciation of letters and vowels according to that precise in that place. According to the Knesset HaGedolah, also ruled in the name of Radbaz that if all the people of the people in his city speak in that manner, it's permissible to appoint him to lead these services. We can infer from this, in our case, that since the language spoken in schools and in gatherings of the people is in the Sephardi accent, a phenomenon that is spreading not only in Israel but also in diaspora. I'm not sure how many times he's been here. It is permissible to appoint a prayer leader who speaks and reads with this accent so that his reading be understandable and pleasant to his listeners. Right? So in other words, we're not in the old country anymore. We're in Israel, where everyone in the street throughout their lives are speaking in the Sephardi accent. Therefore, the one that is most consistent with what they hear and what they understand all day long is the Sephardi accent. And therefore, that is actually the best pronunciation for them to recite the Shema as well. And it doesn't matter if by doing so, they might be losing out on some distinction that they would have had in the Ashkenazi or Yemenite accent. And it doesn't matter, right? Because the best accent is the one that is consistent with what you hear and what you understand best throughout the rest of your day. Therefore, amazingly, the change that was made in the street, in the public, by secular and mixed society will have an impact now on Halakhah, because that's what we speak in the street. It appears to me, in my humble opinion, that this does not violate the principle of do not forsake the teachings of your mother, since changing the accent is, in this case, is not by desire, but by necessity, because of the fact that the general public has willingly adopted the use of the Sephardi pronunciation at home and in the street, and particularly in public gatherings. This necessitates a change of pronunciation in the synagogue, because it is impossible for a person to change from his regular daily language to a different language pattern during prayer. All right, so I don't know, what do you think if those who are in Israel, who have been to Israel and gone to different synagogues and shtivos, has this happened? What do you find? How are people pronouncing Shema in synagogues? In my experience, which is mostly going to Dati Leumi Batei Knesiyot, whether it's Sephardi or Ashkenazi, I find that generally the accent is according to modern Israeli Hebrew accent, right? But probably in Hasidic Batei Knesiyot, not so. They might be speaking modern Israeli Hebrew in the street, but they would not do so for study and prayer.
Can I say something?
Right. That's definitely true in Jerusalem.
they talk about the Hebrew that they'd use in the synagogue as Lashon Kodesh, and it's not the same Hebrew that they speak on the street. And they can give you a conversation where one line will be in Lashon Kodesh, and the next line is in regular, what we would consider Sephardi Hebrew.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I add something?
Yes.
As an Israeli, maybe I will switch into Hebrew. But I think we should have the idea that in Israel, especially I think in the Dati Leumi, if you are from East Europe or you follow Ashkenazi, you are Galuti. And if you follow the Mizrahi Sephardi, you are authentic.
Right.
So, it's rejection of Galut, and Jews from Yemen are not Galuti. Like if you come from Ethiopia and you are not Galuti, you are authentic. So calling children not Yedidia, but Yedidia is not being Galuti, because in Ashkenaz, in Yiddish, they said Yedidia. So God forbid you should be Galuti. I think it has to do with this Israeli mentality just in the background.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. Thank you for adding that. And I think what happens in Israel spills over to Galut as well. And probably here, most of our modern Orthodox Dati Leumi schools, the teachers are pronouncing in modern Israeli Hebrew during instruction, and probably in the Haredi and Hasidic communities, they're using more of a Yiddish and Ashkenaz pronunciation.
Dr.
Anyway,
Hidri,
yes.
I had a question. There's an ellipsis here in your translation, so I wasn't clear. Is he saying it's permissible to have a shliach tzibur who is pronouncing in the sort of mainstream Sephardi pronunciation, or is he saying that is preferable? In other words, is he advocating that everybody adopt this one way of speaking that is familiar to everybody, or is he saying if you want to do that, it's fine, but it's fine to keep your own?
This ellipsis here, I think it was talking about in Talmudic times. It was perfectly fine for someone in
and
high
I'm
school.
sorry, probably the later ellipsis.
The point of prayer who speaks and reads in accent, so
it's
that
permissible
his reading
to
be understandable. I think he would say it's preferable.
Preferable.
Yeah, because that everyone understands that way.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we can see that Rabbi Uziel's vision has been half enacted, but he's ahead of his time in many ways. So we'll have to see in the future how things play out. But now to the next topic, which is very much related to his view of unity. I guess in the previous example, he wants everybody to speak in a Sephardi way, so you can accuse him of just being a Sephardi elitist. But he was not. He was consistent in wanting uniformity, whichever way that meant, just always following what the best practice, the best of both worlds. So when it came to Yibum and Chalitza, which happens, and if a man dies without children, and then the obligation is on his brother to marry the widow. In Ashkenaz lands, this was not done. Instead, Chalitza was performed in order to separate the brother-in-law and the widow would go and marry another person. Whereas in Sephardic lands, people chose and often actually performed Yibum. In some cases, the living brother might be married already, but in those lands, polygamy was permitted. And even if not, this was a custom that was done, and on a case-by-case basis. So now, when we come to the state of Israel, should there be different practices, different halachot, or should we try to make one uniform? So here, this is written by both Chief Rabbi Yitzhak Herzog and Rabbi Uziel. And this would be after 1948. So they write, in most Jewish communities and in Ashkenaz communities in the land of Israel, the communities have taken upon themselves as settled law that Chalitza takes priority over the mitzvah of marrying of Yibum. Even when both man and woman want to go through with the levirate marriage, they are not allowed to do so. And in situations where the levirate is already married, the practice in all communities is not to allow the levirate marriage to occur. Given that in our days, it is clear that most levirate marriages are not done with the pure intent to fulfill a mitzvah, by which he means that the intent should only be to uphold the name of the deceased and have a child, that would continue and inherit. But nowadays, people have other intentions. Maybe they are attracted to their sister-in-law, and that's their main reason, and not only for the sake of doing chesed for the deceased, and for the sake of ways of peace and unity in the state of Israel, so that the Torah may not become like two Torahs, right? That was the language of Rashi explaining Lo titkodedu. We hereby establish for all the inhabitants of the land of Israel and for all immigrants who may make aliyah from this point forward, that is completely forbidden to perform the mitzvah of levirate marriage. All are obligated to perform the act of chalitza. A lever is obligated to support his brother's widow in accordance with the ruling of the rabbinical court until he performs chalitza and exempts her from the levirate marriage. Dispensation to permit levirate marriage against this prohibition can only be given under special circumstances, a decision of the expanded council and the signature of the chief rabbis of Israel. So a couple of interesting things is that in the end, he does give an out, right? Maybe there's some case that can come up in which it would be appropriate to perform yibum. So there is that possibility for exceptions. And the second to last line is very important. What happened sometimes, unfortunately, is that the request of a chalitza turned the woman into an aguna type of situation because this widow is not allowed to marry anybody else before chalitza happens. And then the brother, who might be a nice guy, who might not be such a nice guy, will say, oh, I want to do yibum. And she'll say, yeah, but I don't want to marry you. And so now he'll give her our time and might use that to extort money from her or other demands. And so it led to a really terrible situation. And so therefore, part of this takana said that he has to pay her a certain amount of money. He has to support her during that time, since she can't go and marry anybody else. And so he's responsible for her. He's going to have to pay her support until he does chalitza. So therefore, it's kind of like the way the rabbinic prenup works nowadays. So this would prevent people from withholding the chalitza, and since no one would do the yibum anyway, so this resolved a number of problems, including the helping the woman in that situation, and also bringing a sense of uniformity, and probably also the strangeness of yibum in the modern world, and especially when people are not doing it with intention only for the mitzvah. So I think this was a great bold move by the chief rabbis to come together. This was rejected by Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. So I bring this again as another contrast. It's interesting to see one posek, but in isolation, you can't really appreciate where they are unless you see the other forces that are arguing against them. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef says, in my humble opinion, it was incorrect for Rabbi Uziel and the other Sephardi sages who collaborated with him to support this agreement, which completely negated the commandment of levirate marriage, right? There's a mitzvah in the Torah, now you're just throwing it out. And the concept of lo titkodedu does not apply to this. Since every community follows its original practice, it is like two courts in one city. Talmud makes that distinction. If you have two different courts, even in one city, right, then it's permitted. Only one court, when half the people and half are fighting, then it's a problem. That would be like one synagogue, which was his the opening case. And that furthermore, each community is considered like a city unto itself. So even if both communities are living together, since they came from different cities, we consider them like two separate entities. Since the members of one community cannot force their opinion on the members of another community, that which the members and presidents of the chief rabbinate wrote in the above quoted agreement, issued a decree forbidding yibum, completely requiring chalitza for the sake of peace and unity, that the Torah not appear as two Torahs. That was a quote of what they said. With all due respect, they exaggerated in this, and their words are completely inaccurate. For it is a daily occurrence in various rulings, such as the laws of ritual slaughter and other rituals, that there are differences between the Sfaradim, who follow Shulchan Aruch, and Ashkenazim, who follow the Ramah. And the same true is regarding other things, pronunciation, Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzot, the way they're written, and so on and so forth. And he quotes Rav Kook on his side here as well. And he concludes, by the way, quotes, do not forsake the teachings of your mother, right? This is a a common phrase that's used against Rabbi Uziel's vision. And he says that Rishon LeZion Rabbi Uziel suggested, because of his great passion for the unity of the state of the nation and the removal of barriers separating the communities, to waive the Sephardi standards for ritual slaughtering. Right. So this was another matter in which Rabbi Uziel said we should have one standard for ritual slaughtering, and that also he said will all follow the Ashkenazim, and to create a uniform approach to ritual slaughtering in Jerusalem, and agree that the Sephardim would accept the Ashkenazi customs. It seems that with regard to the agreement of the prohibition of levirate marriage for Sephardim, Rabbi Uziel continued his approach because of his great passion for in the unity of the nation. Great is love, for it destroys regular patterns of behavior. In truth, it would be regrettable to nullify the rulings of our rabbis, the authorities in this generation, and the greatest of Sephardic rabbis for the perception of national unity. So on the one hand, he's praising Rabbi Uziel for his intention, right? You have, I know you mean well, but you're not really getting unity out of this. I think what Rabbi Ovadia feels like is that the Ashkenazim are simply being dominant, right? Because in one area after the other, because they are the majority, because they hold some seats of power, what's going to end up happening is that unity means that the Sephardim give up on all of their practices, customs, traditions, and end up having to give into and become Ashkenazim. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, I think, is coming from a different approach altogether. He was a unifier as well, but in a different way. He wanted to unify all of the Sephardic communities. So he didn't want to have some people following Ben Ish Chai and something with the Iraqi and Moroccan customs and Syrian customs, and this would be untenable to have in one country. So he's sensible to that, and therefore he says, since we're in the land of Maran Rav Yosef Karo, we should all follow Shulchan Aruch and abandon your ancestral traditions. A lot of people were not happy about that. That people that came from prior customs. So there is some similarity in that sense. But I think Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was extremely successful in unifying the Sephardim. And by doing that, however, he created a stronger counterweight to Ashkenazi dominance. And so that's, he felt Sephardic pride was more important than national unity, or the perception of national unity. So that's the counter argument to Rabbi Uziel. And again, when we're done, I'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts on which vision has won out, or which vision do you wish would or will win out in the end. Okay, this is a fantastic picture of Rabbi Uziel speaking at a rally against the British White Paper. So, just to remember, in addition to all of his halachic activity, he's also very, very involved in political activity and helping the not yet formed state of Israel. Okay, and in that regard, a really practical question came up. Well, this is written in 1920, so still before there was voting for the state of Israel, but I suppose there was some voting in the early Zionist congresses. And the question is, should women be allowed to vote? All right, 1920. In other countries also, this is still being discussed and debated. That's one question. Second, are women allowed to have a position of political authority? So regarding this, I did not quote Rav Kook. Rav Kook here says no, women should not be allowed to vote. Right? This is not our way. He wrote that political authority belongs to men, and women have are in the private domestic domain. It can lead to fighting. What if the man wants to vote for one and then the woman for another? It'll lead to fighting in the household, and there won't be shalom bayit. And then if they go to vote, right, they're going to mix together in the voting places, and that will lead to all kinds of non-sneus activity. So Rav Kook was against it. Rabbi Uziel disagrees. And here's just a little snippet of what he writes about this. He says, we find no clear ground to prohibit this. All right, first of all, there's no absolute, doesn't say anywhere that women may not vote. I mean, if Halakhah said that, then what can we do? We don't just follow whatever we want. But there is no actual prohibition. And it is inconceivable that women should be denied this personal right. For in these elections, we elevate leaders upon us and empower our representatives to speak in our name, to organize the matters of our yishuv, to levy taxes on our property. The women, whether directly or indirectly, these representatives and obey their public and national directives and laws. How then can one simultaneously pull the rope from both ends, lay upon them the duty to obey those elected by the people, yet deny them the right to vote in the elections, right? No taxation without representation, no legislation without representation, right? They need to follow the laws and pay the taxes, and yet they have no say on what those laws should be. So it's just logical. You don't need a source for this, that women must have a say in the laws that affect them. Furthermore, if anyone should tell us that women should be excluded from voting public because their minds are flighty, da'atan kalot, which is something that others have quoted, and they know not how to choose who is worthy of leading the people, we reply, well then, let us exclude from the electorate also those men who are da'atam kalot, and such people are never lacking. Okay, I think it's actually a good idea. Maybe there should be some kind of a test before you go and vote, right? Some kind of aptitude test. You need to get at least a certain grade on your SAT before you can vote. All right, I would be in favor of that. However, reality confronts us clearly with the fact that both in the past and in our times, women are equal to men in knowledge and wisdom, dealing in commerce and trade and conducting all matters, personal matters, in the best possible way, right? So therefore, it's impossible. They're just envisioning what the state of Israel will look like. And Rabbi Uziel sees that obviously women must be allowed to vote. He continues and talks about women having political authority, and says also there a woman can be a politician, a judge, and as long as the people are willing to accept it. And so since it's a democracy and people are voting, therefore by voting a woman to be whatever position it is, they will have therefore given their consent, and therefore halachically it would be okay as well. Okay. And finally, we'll talk about the issue of conversion, which is Rabbi Uziel spent a tremendous amount of time on. He has about 36 teshuvot about the issue of giur. And I wrote a paper on this. If anybody's interested, I can send it to you. So here's one example of a situation that comes up, that came up before him, and unfortunately comes up often. Is you had a man married to a Jewish man married to a non-Jewish woman, and they had children. And now later on, the woman wants to convert. So he writes, this non-Jewish woman is already married to a Jew, and by bringing her into the Jewish covenant, she will get closer and closer to her husband's family and his Torah. And furthermore, the children she bore and those she will bear from now on will be completely Jewish, assuming that they convert the previous children too. Behold, this is similar to the cases of Hillel and Rabbi Chia, who were sure that in the end, they would be complete converts. Therefore, they are therefore permitted, or better commanded, to bring them close and have them enter into the covenant of Israel's Torah and remove the affliction of assimilation, which is an inflammatory affliction in the vineyard of the house of Israel. Right, so there's a number of halachic obstacles to doing this conversion. One is the intention. Generally, if someone comes and says, I want to convert, but they have ulterior motives, then we do not accept it. And here it's clear they're already married, so she's only converting for ulterior motives. Second, is she going to be observant in all of the commandments? And if she's only going to do it half-hearted, then we should also not perform the conversion. But Rabbi Uziel would respond to both of these. He says, we have stories in the Talmud. Remember Hillel? Someone came to him and says, please convert me on condition that I can become Kohen Gadol. Bet Shammai kicked him out, and Hillel said, He first converted him, taught him all the laws. While he was learning the laws, he realized he can't become Kohen Gadol. Nevertheless, he was happy that Hillel converted him, and he continued. So even though he started off with ulterior motives, Hillel saw that he was genuine and would end up having proper motives. Rabbi Chia's story is a student, one of his students went to visit a prostitute, and as he was climbing up the beds, his sisit hit him in the face, and he stopped. And this prostitute was so impressed by his self-control. He says, where are you? Where do you study? And she came to the Bet Midrash and asked Rabbi Chia, does this student study here? And he said, yes. And she said, I want to convert so I can marry him. And Rabbi Chia, even though it was for ulterior motives, saw that she had ultimately would have good intent, proper intention, and would fulfill the Torah, and therefore permitted it. And so too, even though in this case it looks like there are ulterior motives, the truth is it's quite the opposite. They actually are already married and they have a family. So when you're living in a secular society where one does not actually have to convert in order to raise a family and be a family and be married, so the fact that she wants to convert at this time shows that she is actually interested in being Jewish and raising her family in a Jewish way. And for all those reasons, is not only permitted, but actually a mitzvah, because the opposite is assimilation and intermarriage, right? That's the situation right now. So he saw conversion as a solution to intermarriage. Furthermore, Rambam's precious words are our guides in any matter in which there is no complete transgression, such as he was suspected of relations with a non-Jew before conversion, or he was married to a non-Jewish woman who converted. For if we do not permit him to marry her after the conversion, they will remain married their whole lives, while she remains not Jewish, and their children will be children of intermarriage and uprooted from Israel. Right? In this case, there's another problem, which is that if someone is suspected of being with a non-Jew before the conversion, then we say they are not allowed to convert and marry afterwards. However, the Rambam wrote a famous responsa regarding this and says, even though that's a problem, we're gonna pick the lesser of two evils, and so we're going to overlook that prohibition, which is a lighter prohibition, so that they don't continue to live together as a Jew and a non-Jew, and so therefore we uproot that commandment in favor of the bigger picture. And so he's following in the line of Rambam, and actually in a long line of Poskim, who were lenient in regard to intermarriage in cases that are like this. In other cases, he ruled the same way, even for a couple that was not yet married, but he saw that they were not going to separate, and so rather than intermarry, they should be converted. Regarding commitment to mitzvot, he notes that even when a convert comes in the first instance, we don't teach them every single mitzvah with every detail. We give them a sampling of the major ones, the minor ones, and we hope that then over the next years they will learn the rest. And so it would be impossible to have any conversion ever if you were going to demand 100% observance from day one. Lastly, regarding conversion is the concept of Zera Yisrael. I'll read one paragraph that I didn't give you here. He says, not only if they are children of a Jewish mother whose children are completely Jewish, but even if they are children of a non-Jewish mother and a Jewish father, behold, they are Jewish seed, and they are like lost sheep. I'm afraid that if we reject them completely by not accepting their parents for conversion, we will be brought to judgment, and it will be said of us, those who went astray, you did not return, and the lost you did not seek. He's quoting a pasuk from Yechezkel, Ve'et ha'ovedet lo bikashtem. His point is that even though someone with a Jewish father and non-Jewish mother, even though halachically they're not defined as Jews, but still they have the Zera Yisrael, a seed of Judaism in them, part of the Jewish people, and therefore it's a mitzvah to go out of our way to find some solution to bring them into the fold and to actually convert them. I think it's very significant that he's quoting a pasuk from Yechezkel. Usually pasukim from Nevi'im are not brought to bear for Halakhah, but I think he sees a vision of the Nevi'im as instructing his goal, and therefore these are like lost sheep, right? They've lost their way, their children, and we have to make sure that Halakhah will be able to accommodate them. And this is more relevant today than ever in Israel, with many examples of like this, people from Russia who have one parent who's Jewish and right now are in a state of limbo. I think if Rabbi Uziel's vision was enacted, then we would not have this problem. Okay, I'm almost at the end. This is a great picture of David Ben Gurion kind of hopping along, trying to catch up with Rabbi Uziel. Both men, great visionaries, but in different ways. And I think that complement each other. And so to conclude, is a couple of wider statements that Rabbi Uziel said about his goals and visions for the nation of Israel. In his ethical will, he wrote, "I have kept in the forefront of my thought the following aims: to disseminate Torah among students, to love the Torah and its precepts, Israel and its sanctity. I've emphasized love for every man and woman of Israel and for the Jewish people as a whole, love for God, the love for the God, Lord God of Israel, the bringing of peace between every man and woman of Israel, to bring genuine peace into the home of the Jew, into the whole assembly of Israel in all its classes and divisions, and between Israel and his Father in heaven." Right. So that's the number one theme: is shalom, peace, and unity between people and between man and God as well. In addition, thinking about the place of the Jewish people in the wider Jewish world, he was also very cognizant of that. He says each country and each nation which respects itself does not and cannot be satisfied with its narrow boundaries and limited domains. Rather, they desire to bring in all that is good and beautiful, that is helpful and glorious to their national cultural treasure. And they wish to give a maximal flow of their own blessing to the cultural treasure of humanity as a whole, and to establish a link of love and friendship among all nations for the enrichment of human storehouse of intellectual and ethical ideas, and for the uncovering of secrets of nature. Happy is the country and happy is the nation that can give itself an accounting of what it has taken in from others, and more importantly, of what it has given of its own to the repository of all humanity. Woe to the country and nation that encloses itself in its own 4 cubits and limits itself to its own narrow boundaries, lacking anything of its own contribution to humanity and lacking the tools to receive from others. All right, this reminds me of Maimonides, who takes a very importantly the verse that when other nations look at our laws and they should come and say, right, what a great and wise nation is this. This impacted his halakhah directly when it came to a question when they were opening the a medical school in Israel, and they needed corpses in order to perform autopsies, to train doctors. And you wouldn't want to go to a surgeon that never trained on a body. The question is, can they use bodies of Jews? And so Rav Kook actually here again said, cadavers, thank you. Rav Kook says, oh, you should import bodies of non-Jews because they are of lesser sanctity and not defile the bodies of Jews. Rabbi Uziel said, right, chas v'shalom, to say that or even to think such a thing. All right, all human beings are created in the image of God, and so therefore performing such autopsies are either permitted for all or prohibited for all. And right, what would it say about this the state of Israel that we only import or even have to buy cadavers from other places? And therefore he says, if you think it's necessary for medical training to save lives, that you have to train doctors in this way, and it is. Therefore, it's permitted to use Jewish bodies as well. We treat them with respect, right? We sew them up nicely, and that way we do not make a chilul Hashem, and we should be always a shining light to other nations when they see our laws. And lastly, regarding Jews and Arabs, this is a statement that he made with Rav Herzog. This is on December 4th, 1947. In other words, just 5 days after the UN partition plan, right? He wrote an open letter to the heads of Arab lands, the brothers, right? We have returned to this land according to the prophets, and we say, please remember the peaceful and friendly relations that existed between us, right, during the Golden Age and throughout this long history. And we were brothers, and we shall once again be brothers, working together, cordial, neighborly way in the Holy Land. And he says, remember what happened with Lot, right? And there was when they had some fights, they said the land is big enough for both of us, and so we should be able to share this land together in peace. So it was not only among within Jews that his concern was always for unity and peace, but really he wanted to extend that vision to our relationship with other nations and with the world and with the Almighty as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Dr. Hidri, thank you so much. We do have a few minutes for questions, and I actually wanted to start us off by putting two questions to you, if you would. So last week, as you know, we had a lecture by Professor Benny Brown about the Hazon Ish, and I was wondering whether Rabbi Uziel had any interactions with the Haredi community. I note he died probably just around the same time as the Hazon Ish. They were really contemporaries. What was if there was any kind of relationship, interaction, communication between them? And my second question actually has to do with this last source that you offered. This is a letter, but did Rabbi Uziel actually have kind of relations, any sort of cooperation working with the Islamic community, the Arab leaders of the time?
Yeah, okay, fantastic. I'll start with the second question. There's a famous scene in 1921 during a battle, a scuffle between Jews and Arabs. He actually put on Arab garb and he went to the front line right in the middle of the fighting, and he spoke in Arabic, addressing both sides and saying, we can get along and actually stop the fighting for that day. So, and I know at least of that, but I don't know if he had any more formal meetings with Arab leaders. I'm not sure if he ever, what his interactions were with the Haredi community or the Hazon Ish. But I was thinking when I was listening to Benny Brown last week that I think a lot of the approach of the Hazon Ish in some ways reminded me of some of the Second Temple sectarianism in two ways. First, as you know, the sectarians didn't like legal fictions, right? They saw Halakhah as in a realism, a stance of realism. So, there's really very little flexibility because it has to accord with nature. Whereas I think other halachists like Rabbi Uziel appreciated the values of legal fiction and saw it more in a nominalistic point of view. And then regarding, cooperating with the army, where Hazon Ish said that if you're drafted to the army, better to die, right? You had Egval Yavor, and seeing the Jewish government in the same way as he would an oppressive non-Jewish government was really astounding, because that's the definition of sectarianism. That's why the Dead Sea sect, so not only do we disagree with what the Maccabees are doing, but we call for their destruction, and we cannot cooperate at all. And Rabbi Uziel is exactly the opposite. When he was asked the question, hey, we can get out of the army, should we? And he said, no, absolutely not. Right? That is our duty, is to join in and to build the state of Israel. So I think there was a lot of contrast between these two figures.
Thank you very much. We have time for one or two questions.
What is the date of the answer of Rabbi Ovadia, the tshuva of Rabbi Ovadia? Do you know by any chance?
Yeah, I guess I don't have it on here, but I can look it up. I don't know offhand.
Because what I had in my mind.
Here it says 5711. So that would be right. That would be 1951.
Oh, I see. So I'm wrong apparently, because I had in my mind when was the big waves of Aliyah of the Mizrahim to start with, because this might be make a difference.
Right.
Before the big waves of Aliyah from the Eastern, from North Africa and so on. The Ashkenazi element had a different weight to it.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. So he wrote that during the lifetime of Rabbi Uziel, which is even more bold to disagree with him so publicly.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Regarding the poll test, I didn't mean to say anything political about that. It was just just an encouragement to have informed decision when we vote. So I didn't mean any offense by that.
what was the overlap between Rav Uziel and Rav Ovadia Yosef? They seem to have such different ways of dealing with halacha.
Right. Well, I mean, and in many ways they do come from the same school. Rav Ovadia Yosef is certainly a complex and very, very significant figure. He's born in 1920, so he's still a rather young man when Rabbi Uziel died, and he spent a lot of time in Egypt before coming to Israel. I think the sense, the flexibility in Halakhah, making sure that Halakhah be address all Jews wherever they are in their religious background, was something that they had in common. Not giving rulings only for the yeshiva crowd, but seeing the unity of all Israel, whether they are very religious or not yet religious, or only do some things once in a while. So I think there is a commonality in that respect. But I guess it's more in the political arena of maintaining distinctions between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, or looking toward a state in which wherever you came from, now we're all in Israel together, and trying to lessen those distinctions. It really is a tough question, because what happens sometimes when you want unity is you get the lowest common denominator of everyone. I mean, I find that myself, that here I'm in Brooklyn, we follow the Aleppo Syrian traditions, and we follow them very strongly. Like, we know them very, very well, and we know the old songs and customs and very particular details, and that gives our synagogue a lot of rich thickness. Whereas when you're getting together and saying, okay, we're only going to do we sing only the songs that we all know, you end up with just Mipiel and Habibi, which are not my favorite songs. I feel that lacking when I go to an Edot HaMizrach synagogue in Israel. I think for diaspora, I appreciate that we maintain those old distinctions. I think in Israel, it's not realistic that can be kept for a long time because everybody's being educated and marrying each other. I think in Israel, we have to hope for new creativity and new ways, which you see happening, the way old PUTim make it into popular music. And, Israel will be that place of great creativity, where these competing visions will play out over our lifetimes and long into the future. And I guess we'll see in the end who won. But I'm glad that Rabbi Uziel's voice is there, and I hope that it will be an important voice for the people of Israel for many generations.
What did Rabbi Uziel think about Kitniot?
I don't know. I don't remember seeing him write about that.
But that's the big issue.
Right.
There have been bigger issues for our community in the past, and I'm guessing there might even in the present and in the future be bigger issues than Kitniot. In any event, thank you so much, Dr. Hidri. This was a fascinating lecture, and I'm sure we all learned a lot. I know I did. Please all join us next week, where Rabbi Eli Fisher, who's right there on our screen, will be talking about the Hatam Sofer, and we are also working on a sequel series, hopefully for after Pesach, and hopefully we'll be dealing with Ovadia Yosef and other recent-ish Poskim. So thank you all for joining us, and looking forward to seeing you all next.